So welcome to Exceptional TV's Changing Worlds. My name is Karen Judd Smith, and this is where we explore the worlds, the lives, and the perspectives of some of today's visionary change leaders. Now, I'm here today with Quinn Cashion. Did I get your name right, Quinn?
Quinn Cashion.
Quinn Cashion. You can tell I don't live up in the French-speaking area of...
Yeah, I always say it's like fashion, but with a C, with a little twist.
Yeah, that would have been something that would have been nice to go over with you before I introduced you.
That's all right.
But hey, so here we are. Anyway, but Quinn has worked in some fascinating areas. She's worked all over and for the last 15 years has worked in prisons. She's done lunch and learns. She's worked in the workplace, of many different locations, for schools and for families, women impacted by violence and abuse. And she always guides her clients to, who are being impacted by dramatic events in their life toward a natural state of well-being. So life happens to everybody. There are moments when we experience really deep, sometimes profound challenges that leave us a little bit altered. So as I understand, Quinn, you really work to help people get back to a good life.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about you and how you got to this place. And we'll dig into all kinds of other stuff as we go through this interview. I'm really looking forward to it. But tell us a little bit about how you got to here, where you are today, and what brought you to this.
Yeah, well, it's been an interesting journey. And as I say with my name, fashion was where I started my career and spent about 10 years actually in the beauty industry. But I've always did self-development courses for girls. And what I started to find out through those courses, they wanted to know more about relationships. So I got to a point where I did a pivot in my career and went to school and became a counselor. And so I turned beauty inside out, if you will. And so that, as I continued down that path, I got into vocational counseling. That's why I went into the prison system to work with women there, to just give them some hope that when they leave the prison system, that they could become financially independent and finding ways to do that. So that was sort of the steps that I was taking to move into this understanding that we have this human potential to have a better life. And because of my interest with girls, I ended up working for a nonprofit organization that was dealing with eating disorders. And that's where I developed the curriculum for elementary schools called Resilient. And the goal was to help children understand that they have this superpower inside of them that nobody talks about, but it's always there for you. And so that was a great opportunity to help kids reduce their levels of anxiety, of depression, seeing where bullying actually came from. And it was amazing to see just the light bulbs that came on in these children, knowing that they do have confidence. They do have the ability to be resilient.
Well, this is such a powerful, a challenging area to work in. I don't have on the top of my head the kind of statistics about young girls dealing with eating disorders, but it's almost a scary number, as I understand.
It's very scary, yes. And when we were looking at a prevention program, we know that transition years, so elementary to high school to college, were the years that people were more susceptible to an eating disorder. And we're starting to see more boys experiencing that as well because of social media. You have to have that six-pack. And so even our hospital that is focused on eating disorders, they're starting to see boys in there as young as 9 years old. So
right, and I know another lady who's worked with this and has especially focused on those with having had very traumatic experiences in childhood, that yes, it's not just girls, it can be boys, and it's not just, there's all kinds of eating disorders that appear throughout life. And it's enormously challenging, as I understand, for people to really deal with that and resolve that in their own life. So tell us a little bit, could we dig in just a little bit more? Because I think this is such a, an important topic, and it's probably another, it pertains to other issues and other challenges in life. But so how did you go from, turning this fashion inside out? So looking at the mind, and you mentioned to me before that you're looking at how tapping or connecting with those inner resources. How did you discover these, or how did you think about them, or how?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, because when I went to train to be a counselor, you learn all these theories. And so people find a theory that really resonates with them, and none of them really connected with me for some reason. And and it's listening to that inner wisdom that says there's something more, and I was just waiting for that something more. And I have a dear friend of mine who at the age of 60 graduated with her counseling degree and found these principles, or this understanding of the mind, that it was like, wow, this is it. Like, this is the missing link. It's a link that nobody talks about because it's before form. It's before all these theories that have been created. And so to me, that was just like, wow, it was like the jackpot. Because it really allows you the freedom to create from within. It allows you the freedom to listen to wisdom that speaks to you. And so we see that in so many different ways. You'll have a classroom and you'll have different kids that will listen to the same teacher, but their wisdom will pick up different things based on how they operate from within. So the same with parenting. I might parent one child very different from another child because they see life differently. And so it would be my wisdom as a parent to go, okay, how do I connect with that child's potential, their wisdom, their human spirit, to make it come alive more?
So you're talking about the wisdom within, which I'm not debating that at all. What I am trying to understand from you is, how do you put a child in touch with that piece that you are calling their inner wisdom?
Okay, so I find mental life is abstract. We can't put our finger on it. We don't even know what it looks like, except when it becomes form of frustration or anxiety, or, then we see it in action, right? So if we could get back and pull it back into metaphors. I use metaphors a lot to explain the inner life, our psychological life, because it really helps us have more of a visual. So with children, I use the metaphors of the sun and the clouds. So the sun is who we are. That is, when I'm in the sun, I breathe deeper. My shoulders are relaxed. I feel taller. I see possibilities. The sky is clear, so I can see what's possible for me. Nothing bothers me. I let things roll off my back. But then the clouds start to come in, and they can get thicker and more clouds, and it tightens up. And so that is that personal thinking, or habitual thinking that we get into, that we get caught up in. So we all have our habits and our patterns of how we do that. And so that is more a cognitive theory. We would be looking at the content of thought. And when I talk about the power of thought, because I have the power to either be stuck in my clouds and be gripped by it, or I could say, wow, there's some clouds, but my sun, my wisdom, that sunshine inside of me is going to move those clouds away. So the sun is always constant. The clouds are not, and they're always moving and changing. So those are thoughts. Those are formed thoughts that we create. But the constant is the sun. That is that human spirit. It's never shattered. It's never broken. And that's the beauty of
Right.
what I love around this mental health work I do is really about pointing people back to who they really are.
Anyway, that's such a, I mean, just using that metaphor of the sun for the human spirit and the clouds is very, very, very powerful. And my understanding, I mean, it's just very simple. Um, some people put a number on it, but most of our life is kind of lived below our cognitive awareness.
Yeah, we
I mean,
put too much emphasis, to be honest, on the intellect.
right,
We forget about what's behind the intellect. Because
right,
what's behind the intellect is that creative juice, creative
right,
power source, that higher intelligence that we all tap into in different moments, those haha moments, those insights, those gut feelings, that being able to pivot on a dime to address an issue. That is wisdom. That is that deeper self that knows.
So when you're working with children, for example, and I suspect that adults are just larger versions of children and perhaps more complex, and that neocortical interface, that gets in the way a whole lot more with adults, but it's still a lot of it is essentially the same. In terms of helping people then connect with that, how do you get people to make that, instead of getting absorbed by the clouds and overrun by the clouds, but to remember that there is that sun? How do you get people to remember to stay connected to their more essential nature?
Yeah, great question. And I love the word you use, remember, because we forget.
Mm-hmm.
We forget who we really are, and we get caught up and gripped by the mental chatter. I use the metaphor of the ocean a lot. We are the ocean, infinite and powerful, and yet we get caught up with all the waves and the chaos on the surface of the ocean and forget about all the treasures that are underneath the ocean.
Yeah.
And when you go down, it's very calm down there.
Right.
And that is the best place to start to make decisions from. So as I mentioned, I work with women survivors of violence and abuse. They don't realize that they're not broken. They don't realize that they have all these treasures. And they don't realize how incredibly resilient they are.
Right. Right.
Like, it's not even a conversation people have. It's like, do you see how resilient you are? Like, you got out of that situation, you're taking care of your
Right.
children,
Right.
you are bouncing back, and just getting them to start to see that, wow, I am okay.
Right. And even the words. I mean, many times, like I work, for example, in my work with the Alliance of NGOs on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, there's this whole focus on, crime and criminology and whatever else. But the language that we use, I mean, as victims, and even if it's victim survivors, if that's the label rather than something else, then again, what people are being reminded of is the problem, not even the deeper truth that I guess you're talking about. Is that how you would describe it? I
Absolutely.
don't know your language or how you think about these things exactly. I'm trying to uncover that.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I find we live in a society that wants to label.
Oh,
Like, oh,
yes.
you've got depression. Oh, you've got anxiety. Well, are you depressed 24/7? Like, do you not have a moment of laughter? Or, a woman was labeled with depression for 10 years. And I said, so what do you do for fun? She goes, I love to play pool. And I said, are you depressed during that time? She goes, no, I don't even think about it.
Right.
So if we start to point people back and get them to start to notice that they have something beyond that psychological upset or turmoil that they're in, that there's more that they have available to them, they start to wake up to it.
Yeah.
And that's the difference with this work, is that it's an insight-based learning
Right.
approach.
Right.
because I'm just going to point you back to your beautiful self, to that
Right.
wisdom, to that calmer place. But it'll be up to you to have that aha moment that's like, oh, there I go again. Like I was in did a contract work with the city, and it was a 6-week course, a lunch and learn with staff.
Mm-hmm.
And one woman, after one of the trainings, came in the next week and she says, I noticed how I worry. It hadn't even occurred to her before. Her husband was late picking her up. So automatically she went into, oh my gosh, he's in an accident. And, her mind just started speeding up, and then she stopped and went, wow, gee, I'm worrying now. And yeah, my mom was a worrier and my grandmother was a worrier. So she started to see this pattern of thinking that she picked up in her life. And what a profound insight that is. Because next time she goes into worry mode, she'll bounce back a little quicker than she did before.
So when somebody goes into, for example, their worry mode, as you train people, what do you then recommend that they do? So that, I mean, the awareness of being in the worry mode, then people, of course, can either be consumed by that worry mode and just continue in it, or feel, I know that some of these emotions are very sticky. I call them sticky because they don't like to let go of you, or we don't like to let go of them. Sometimes I think it's that way too. But anyway, so how do you advise or guide a person like that to move on? First notice that awareness is essential, and then to what do you?
Yeah. So it's about the power of thought.
Mm-hmm.
We're always feeling our thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Always feeling our thinking. So that is a gift. So our emotions are a gift. It's letting us know when our thinking is off track. And so when I notice that the clouds are coming in, those a lot of thought coming in and they're getting quite stormy, the wisdom behind that tells me what I need to do. It's that wisdom that says, time for a cup of tea, or time to go for a walk, or, best to call Sally because that a conversation with her just helps you sort of clear the cobwebs and get some clarity. So everybody is different, and I don't teach strategies or techniques because each one of us is different in terms of how we show up in those moments. So the more grounded we become in our understanding of the power of the mind and the power of thought, we'll start to see what occurs to us in each moment, because each moment is so different. I could be in a meeting, a staff meeting, and I can notice my mood drop. Mm-hmm. If my mood drops, I start to narrow in my thinking, in my judgments, or my way of looking at the situation or the conversation. So I sit there and wait for that mood to shift because I know it's just my thinking about what's going on. And then I can let it open up so that I can start to be more curious about what they're saying. And my listening gets deeper. And when my listening gets deeper, it gets quieter. And I start to listen for the seed of truth in what they're saying so we can have a meeting of the mind so that we can start working in the same direction. Yeah.
So then you that's probably not a good way of saying it, but you encourage people to, in a sense, to pause and to go deeper and to look inward rather than to float along on the waves, to use your metaphor before, of the emotion at the time. Is it something like that? How do you?
Yeah, because, until you understand how the ocean works,
Mm-hmm.
when you understand the resources and the calmness underneath, surfers are really good at using those waves.
Right.
Well, and somebody like me would drown in those waves, right? So there's a deep understanding that you start to hear about your inner life, the inner dialogue, so that you can bring it into the outside world. Just like a surfer able to use those waves really well. They have an understanding of the wave, so
Right.
that they can use it to its fullest potential. So somebody with anger, for an example, if I'm in the emotion of anger, I could just blurt out things and people will, get really judgmental or really get, in position. But if my anger is deep about the violence against women, there's a clarity that comes with that. There's a wisdom that comes with that makes me want to create change that is based on truth and movement to create human potential for all women. And so there's a difference being caught up in the emotion of anger versus seeing what it's speaking to that really grounds you into something that's deeper.
So when you work with people, like you mentioned that you do those lunch and learns, and so there's a series of them, as I don't know how many, 6,
Yes.
7, whatever. So you work with people, you introduce the principles, you give them exercises to do in between. Is that
Yeah.
what can you
Well,
explain
yeah,
a little bit about how you work with people?
Yeah, for sure. Great question. Because what happens a lot is that when we're in a classroom, we all automatically go into our intellect. Let me try to see if I can figure this out, right? and that's the last thing I want people to do.
I mean, I'm here trying to figure this out, so I'm in my classroom mode. But keep going, Quinn.
Yeah, so that's perfect, because that's what we're trained to do. We're trained to use our intellect to figure things out, and it bumps up against our belief systems and what we've learned so far. And that's the beauty of children, is that they don't operate from that place. They operate from a whole other deeper place of knowing. So for an example, a child learning how to walk, they observe what's going on in their outside world. It's like, wow, I'm going to try that. And so they try to get up and they fall, and they try to get up again and they fall again, and they'll do it for a while. And then if they start getting into a bad mood about it because they're frustrated, they'll just crawl away and do something else, right? So that they're not listening to this part. They're listening to something deeper within them. And so what I find with wisdom is that it'll speak to you. You ever get that gut feeling? It's like, oh yeah. And then the ego or the intellect comes in and go, I don't think so. And it tries to challenge this part, but this part is really clear. And there's a knowing around that. And so the intellect almost has to catch up to it to be able to, okay, I see it, I get it, I know what I need to do now. That's when the action piece starts to jump in. It's kind of, I just was reading a little bit from the book you wrote, United Nations Unlocked, about the fellow where there was a tsunami coming and he was a farmer. Well, that's a really great example of observing the outside world, and he gets a gut feeling of, wow, I got to do something. And then he went into the intellect that operated into action mode. So that's a really good example of tapping into a greater wisdom and being able to bring it into the intellect and then bring it into action.
Right. So then you see that the wisdom is kind of that more internal piece, and then when we are more in touch with that and aligned with that, so that we're not fighting within ourselves, then we're able to get all parts of us, including the rational part, so to speak, to work. I mean, and to the alignment of all of those then is what makes the potency about accomplishing things. Is that kind of what you're saying? Or
perfect.
Maybe you can say it. That was my stumbling around trying to say it. But how do you describe that?
Oh, wow, that was perfect, actually. I use that word a lot, alignment, because a lot of times we're out of alignment with the deeper self. And we know that because the feeling is really uncomfortable. Either butterflies in the stomach, we feel like we can't use our voice. sweaty palms. So there's, we all have our own thing that lets us know when we're out of alignment. But the gift about that is just knowing that. It's not about beating ourselves up or I shouldn't be here, or, that's the thing about mindset, fixed mindset versus open mindset. It's all mindset, and all of it is okay. Nothing's good or bad there. It's just, it is what it is.
Yeah.
But underneath that, if I could start to say, wow, I'm noticing that I'm in a fixed mindset and I don't want to be here because I'm not able to listen to what that other person's saying because they're seeing the world completely different from me, and I'm trying to align with the human potential in both of us, meeting of the minds. So I have to get quieter to do that, and I can't do that in a fixed mindset.
Yeah.
So then I start to see that I move down the continuum to more of an open mindset, so I can listen more. Because in a fix, I stay stuck in my own personal view of life and not in the possibility of seeing something new for the first time.
Just as I'm hearing you speak, and I'm thinking about different things. I mean, just the fact, and you mentioned it earlier, that we have internal dialogue. I mean, we have conversations with ourselves all day. It's like, what am I going to do now? Oh, I'm going to do this. Oh, I'm hungry. Oh, I'll go and get something. I mean, there's we're constantly engaged in some sense, like there's parts of us, and that's pretty much not just me, right?
Yes. Well, that's what I would call mental chatter.
Yeah.
That would be monkey mind, because it's really busy. And so they've actually done research on this. I'm not quite sure how they've done it, but anyways, they said, the average person has about 60,000 thoughts a day.
Right.
They did the same research on a Buddhist monk who's in meditation, and it was down under 10,000. So, and somebody who is, hyper thinker, they could be 60,000 plus, right? So we can see that there is room for us to quiet our minds, and so important right now in our world to be able to do that, because when we look at the outside world, I can have a lot of thinking about that, a lot of thinking about it. When I start to look within, beyond my intellect, into the quieter places within me, it's a lot calmer. I'm not bothered by the outside world. And so that brings me to the next point about living from the inside out. Mm-hmm. Most of us live from the outside in. This is happening in the outside world. I go into panic, I go into anxiety, or whatever it is I do. But if I look from the inside out, I start to understand that I am creating my own experience of looking at the world. So if I'm dealing with a person in a conflict situation, it'd be great, most of us go, oh, he makes me so angry.
Right.
Whereas if we turn that understanding around from the inside out, it's like, wow, I'm noticing I'm getting angry about what they're doing. So how can I show up differently to that? And when we're more grounded, we're able to stay more present to that conversation. But if we go into the outside in perspective of making that person, why can't they just speak in a calm way? Why can't they use different words? Then we get, we get in that spiral that, those clouds just come in really fast.
Also, then during, when we do that, we're actually surrendering our own power, so to speak, to make decisions, to live our lives by giving that away. I mean, in a way, that's giving that power to the other person.
Yeah, and so many people don't see that. As soon as we make it about them, we've just given them our power.
Right.
Yeah, and really, when I work with women who's been through trauma, I'm 12 hours a week at least in training with them for about 3 weeks before they go, oh, I get it. Some have insights within the first week, and it's like, wow, yeah, this makes a lot of sense, but I'm not quite, it's kind of like what you said. Yeah, it makes sense. And yet there's something, I'm not just, I haven't nailed it yet.
Yeah.
and that's just that deeper understanding, just starting to evolve,
So part of what I mentioned before about saying that recognizing that there are different parts of us, I guess that was a way of trying to analytically look at the inner world, to acknowledge that there are there are the emotional responses that we have to situations, or I loved what you said, feeling our thinking. I mean, we can notice the feelings and those things that arise and whatever. There is this rational mind, and then there's this other part that is more deeper wisdom. Anyway, it's just an interesting way to imagine. Do you encourage people to, how do you get people to think about those different dimensions of who we are? Or is that just, you just go back to the metaphors of the sun and the cloud? Or
I'll give you an example. I was in a grade 5 class, and some kids were fiddlers. They have their pencils and they're just
yeah,
they're always moving. And I was giving a presentation. There was a couple of adults in the room, and one of them said to one of these boys, stop fiddling. And then next thing you know, another adult was taking his pencils away from him. And I was really bothered by that. It's like, wow, here I am running the class, and they thought it was okay to interrupt my class to stop the fiddler when I wasn't even bothered by it. So I thought, okay, this is an opportunity for me to teach not only the kids, but the adults. So next week I came in and we created a circle. And I said, all you fiddlers on one side of the room and non-fiddlers on the other side. And I said, let's have a conversation. And then one kid said, why do you fiddle? And one boy says, well, it helps me to quiet my mind so I can listen better. And then another kid from the fiddle side said, well, how can you sit there so still for a class? And then another boy says, well, I'm not always listening. So it was so beautiful, because it was like there was all these popcorn aha moments going on in the room that made it go, oh, there's something more behind behavior that we're not looking at. So behavior comes from an emotion that is triggered by a thought. And we need to go back up the chain to really explore how they're seeing the world. And it's through that power of thought. And so a lot of us can get entrenched into a belief system.
right.
So people in leadership positions probably have a belief system of how things should run. And so here's somebody coming in with a completely fresh idea that's, taking you in a different direction. It's like, whoa, that doesn't fit into my reality yet. So a good leader would be able to go, okay, it doesn't fit into my reality, but let me hear more. Let me hear how, with what I know, with what you're saying, and see if there is something here to help us align, like you're saying, align. And that to me is a meeting of the minds, that alignment piece.
And that
so
also, it comes back to what you were talking about before, about the difference between the open mind and the set mind. Is that what you?
Fixed mindset.
Fixed mind, yeah.
Yeah, because a fixed mind, there's no room for growth. There's no room there's no room for possibilities. And that's where we get stuck with problem solving, is that people need to come to the table in solution mode. And a solution mode only comes when I slow down my chatter. Because people don't do that. They don't listen very well. And that's one of the trainings that I do, is quiet listening. What is that? How do I go there so that I can really hear what the other person's saying in a way that brings some truth to the table? I was in another group. It was at-risk youth that were, late teens, early 20s. It was an employment program. Anyways, one of the boys in the program hacked into the firewall at the college. So the college came down on me and said, keep them in line. And going, okay, well, I can't manage all these kids and what they're doing online. So I
didn't know I was meant to be a cybersecurity officer.
Yeah. So we sat in a circle. And so there was a lot of back and forth. It's like, okay, I'm in the middle. I've got the college on one side and I've got you guys on this side. So, help me figure this out because I don't have the answer. And as a good leader, sometimes it's good not to have the answer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We don't. We don't always have the answers.
No. And then it's probably a good thing because you want to get different perspectives on it. And so, bickering back and forth. And then one young woman who's a quiet girl through the whole training, finally spoke up. She goes, well, if we care about Quinn, we don't want to get her into trouble. And I thought that was such a neat thing to say because it was completely out of the realm of the issue, but it connected all of us. There was a oneness in that, right. And that was the end of the conversation.
And the end of the hacking?
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
May I suggest we put you in touch with a whole lot of other people because there's an awful lot of hacking going on, and we. I'm being a little facetious there, but but so yeah. I mean, so just out of curiosity, in things like that, where you've got mega problems at social levels, not just in a classroom, not just in those contained spheres. What would you say what you're doing and what you're promoting through what you're doing would have something to say to, some of the larger ills, so to speak, in society that you are addressing the challenges of with, women in prison, with the issues of eating disorders, even just addressing people's behavioral misbehaviors. What does your approach have to say? How could it be scaled? What would you see the implications are for that at larger and larger levels?
Amazing potential. Huge amount of potential. If we just took some time to look at the power source we have to unite with each other at a deeper level. Look at what happened with this pandemic. Some countries, they pivot so quickly and they addressed it. They got in alignment. I'm in Vancouver. We have an incredible government that listened to the health people, and we cut it off right before it got started. It was just amazing to see what's possible when we get out of the ego and we get out of our own way.
Yeah, we Americans don't want to listen. We're not going to listen so easily.
Well, and what they're listening to is their own personal thinking. They're listening to that habit, that belief system that they have, that they're not going to take away my independence. And yet they forget that the next step from independence is interdependence. And that interdependence is taking care of one another and doing our best to support each other. And it really does start in our homes. Bullying is a really good example that people can establish that thinking early on in life that it's okay to bully. And then they do that in the classroom, and then we call it office politics when we get into the workplace. So it's the same thing. And what I'm seeing is the victim and the bully are operating from the same mental state, the state of insecurity.
Right.
So people that are insecure, I'm going to stay stuck in my way of looking at the world instead of going, okay, is there a possibility that wearing masks is a good idea? I'm going to try it for a while. I'm going to maybe talk to some people who've had COVID and find out what it was like for them so I can make a more informed decision or choice about my health and the health of the people that are around me.
So when you do come across, because again, right there, you're, of course, advocating an open mind, not a fixed mind, a curious mind. When you come across those who are not as curious, who are firmly holding their belief systems, right or wrong, and they may have very good reasons to do so. Heavens only knows what's happened in their life and why they're like that. But the fact is that they are. How do you work with somebody like that? How do you get them to think differently? What's the process there for those who are very closed and fixed to becoming more open and curious and willing to explore? When they are, as you said, bully and victim, it's both insecurity. Yes. So, but a bully has the superficial clothing of being in charge and in control and all of that. Yeah. But how do you break down that? I mean, it's almost, how do you get them to break down or to choose to let go of that part of them, that insecurity?
So when we're more grounded, we're more secure in who we are. And we start to see their health. And so that's the beauty of understanding these principles, or these keys that are behind the fixed and open mindset, is looking beyond that to that person's spirit, to that person's humanity, to that oneness that we have. Because if I stay locked in the fixed mindset they're showing up with, I'm going to go along the ride with them. My mood will probably drop pretty quick. Yeah. Unless I'm really grounded. I'm still learning. That's the beauty of what I know. It's
we all
every
are.
moment is different for me, and every situation is different. It's like, oh man, I didn't ground myself in that situation, but this other one, man, I was really good. So, but if I lose my bearings, then I need to do my self-care. That is it. That's where the oxygen mask comes down first for me, and then I'll deal with that situation afterwards, because that's so important. People forget about that part. Because if my mood drops, if I start to feel insecure, I'm not going to communicate very well. They're going to hear my insecurity. And so what's the point of me continuing that conversation? So that's the first point. The second point is then seeing their insecurity if they're going into fixed mindset, and just trying to see the innocence in them. And that's the word is like, how can I see their innocence?
Yeah.
But also not be a doormat to it.
Right.
That's the thing about, oh, let's be in our sunshine, everything's good. It's like, okay, well, that's what I was saying earlier about anger. When there's some truth behind that.
Right.
Yeah, you don't mess with Mama Bear. Like, she's very clear what needs to get done here. and so that's a really important piece, that when we are really grounded, we do what's necessary in those moments. It's like the farmer setting the fields on fire. Yeah. There goes all their food, but man, he saved a lot of people, right?
Yep. Choices, decisions. So I'm going to ask you one more question, then we're going to be getting to the point where I would like you to talk a little bit about the gift that you have for our listeners. But I guess my question was, because you keep coming back to that, one of the first things it sounds like that you encourage, and that is to be grounded. So what does that mean? I mean, I could go out and take my shoes off and be grounded. I can go back to my roots on the farm and I can go get grounded that way. Or what do you mean by getting grounded?
So that's a really good example of your wisdom speaking to you. going outside and taking my shoes off and standing in the grass, or yeah, maybe I'm going to go back to the farm and just hang out for a week. Everybody's different in terms of what the action piece needs to be in any given moment. So I might be in a board meeting and I'm noticing that I'm losing my bearings. I might just take a glass of water and do some deep breathing and just let everybody else talk for a bit so I can get back into that solid place where I can then communicate effectively. I might, need to get a little more curious about what that other person's saying so that I don't react and I'm responding better. So again, the action piece is secondary to the understanding that comes behind the operating system behind the action. Once we have a better understanding of the operating system, man, you'll know how to drive that car, that Ferrari down the highway, and you know how to stay in the road, not over to the side.
That's why I taught all of my kids, about how an engine works, because if you want that car to last a long time, it's better that they understand some of what the ramifications of what they're doing. But anyway, that was my farmer's daughter side of me, always wanted to understand the mechanics of it. But yeah.
Yeah, and it brings us to, mental health, mental well-being, mental resilience. It's a stigma in our society.
Yeah.
And yet it is the system that helps us experience life in the best way possible as well. And so why wouldn't we want to know more about that?
Yeah. Anyway, I so appreciate the work that you're doing. It's such a fascinating area. It's challenging precisely because you're not just saying, okay, step one, bend down, step two, stand up. I mean, it's just not that simple. And yet it's, I guess you're trying to encourage people to find that enormous power source that is, I guess I've often thought of, having grown up on a farm, where my closest friends when I was very young were like the willow tree, the lamb, the kangaroo. I grew up in the middle of nowhere. So people were always amazing to me. And then as I went through life, I saw, I don't care what your background is, what your education is, humans are amazing. I mean, what we can do. So that the magic of the human being, it's not magic, but anyway, is just, and finding ways to help that come out. That's what I hear that you are doing. And I think that's just so wonderful, helping people find those gems within themselves.
Yes, and helping people flourish. The stories I get from women who've been through the training, it's like, wow, I didn't realize I wasn't broken. Or yeah, I've been through so many programs trying to fix me, and you're not trying to fix me.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of the work too, is that I never get bored, because it's all, I have to get really curious about how everybody sees their own little world and how I can help them expand it, so that they can live a happier life, and they can see how they can do that independently.
So in terms of helping people do that, I believe you have something for people that might be, something that can help them do that. So
I do have something that I've written about, the 3 essential keys to the influential mind, that I would love to share with them if they resonate with anything that I said today. And let's just see if they want to learn more about it, because again, it's a unique way. I'm working with a global community right now where we're really wanting to broaden this understanding to share the resilience that we have as a human species, and how do we cultivate that more in our societies and in our families.
Wonderful. So people are going to be able to find that on the XceptionalTV site, and just have to look up Quinn Cashion. I guess I keep messing your name up. My deepest apologies. But Quinn Cashion, and then there'll be a link to that information. They'll be able to just download it and pop it right in there. And I thank you for giving our listeners this wonderful little gift. And what do you think that if they read that, what do you think they'll discover? What do you hope for them from reading that?
Yeah, I want them to go beyond the intellect when they read it and just let it sit with them. It's kind of like when you listen to your favorite music. You know, you're not listening to all the words, you're listening for the feeling that comes behind that. And so, yeah, just get reflective and get curious about, if this is a new way of looking at the world or how your mind works, or it might just enrich what you already know, which could be also a value as well.
Well, I know that listening to some of my favorite music, it is a wonderful experience. So I hope that for all of the people who take you up on your gift and of that insight and those ideas. So again, Quinn, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. It's been fun to explore what you're doing. I'm all I can say is I certainly hope that you go out there and get more people in touch with that potency within themselves. And is any closing remarks other than that? I'd just like to
thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I just, when we met a few weeks ago, I just love what you're all about and the change that you're creating in this world and the support you're giving people to create a better world. And we do need to come together to do that. And so I just thank you for taking this time to have this conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, it's been a wonderful time. Thank you very much. And I look forward to being back here with you again on Exceptional TV. This is Karen Judd Smith and Quinn Cashion signing off for today. Thank you.